Thank you, Florian. Where is the clicker? Sorry. So let me just practice. Yeah, good. Okay. So I work for an organization called Innovations for Poverty Action. And what we do is conduct impact evaluations across developing countries, but also in the US. I've been asked to start the conversation by giving a brief introduction on what impact evaluation is and what impact evaluation methodologies are. And then I'll just focus on some of the evidence very briefly that we have internationally from work on financial capability. The first distinction that we have to make is the one between process and impact evaluation. Sometimes we speak about evaluation and we confound the two terms. But every program starts with inputs, produces outputs. An example would be a financial literacy training or a financial education program delivers an output, which is a number of students that are trained in the particular curriculum. And then there's a question of outcomes, impacts. So how much has the behavior of the students changed and how much has the knowledge improved? Process evaluation focuses on the first bit. It's a question about accountability. It's a question of monitoring. Did we do what we said we were going to do? And impact evaluation is really about did what we said, did the program really ultimately change the behavior of individuals? We'll see that in most programs that we do, even in financial education programs, oftentimes attendance or participation is not at 100%. It's at a 50%. So it's very important to do both of these type of measurements, right, when we're looking at a program. And it's very important when we think of impact assessments to have the data to go back and see, well, how well was the program implemented? I think it's really key. So now let's focus on impact evaluation, though. The question of impact evaluation is, did the program or the policy work or not work? And if it didn't work, can we test and can we evaluate or compare it with other policies to try to understand which approach could be more effective? So why do we do that? Because sometimes policies look a little bit like this gym. There's an escalator going to the gym to exercise, and everybody is taking it. Oftentimes, because we haven't designed policy very well, this is really what we're doing. We're giving people free access to, easy access to loans, and then convincing them that one thing that they should do is save part of the money that they're borrowing at a very high interest rate into a savings account, because it's good to save for the future. And yes, it's true, but maybe they should use that money to get a return that is at least comparable to the one that, to the interest rate that they are paying on that loan. This is a very common issue in microcredit and microfinance across the world. So impact, straight definition. How have the lives of individuals changed compared to how they would have changed had the program not existed? This is why impact evaluation is difficult. How the lives would have changed in the absence of the program is a difficult thing to figure out. The clicker is suddenly not working. Yes. So it's a simple subtraction. It's the difference between what's, where we are now, minus where we would have been had the program or the financial education training not existed. This is the impact of the program. And so here is another nice example. Let's take again the financial education program. And we were fortunate enough to measure the level, the knowledge that the students had on financial issues over time. We have 5 measurements here, and we see that it improves over time. Then we start a program. We have a training, let's say a very intensive financial education program. And, clicker. Okay. Now, after the program, we see that the trend of increase in knowledge is actually, proceeding at a higher pace. Can we say that this was, that the program had an impact just by looking at this graph? The answer is that we really don't have enough information, because we miss the part, what would have happened had this training not existed. And if the clicker, okay. And so this issue is what we have found a very complicated name to, to label this issue as the counterfactual. The problem of this counterfactual, of this situation where in which we're trying to look at what would happen to us had the program not existed, or had we not taken part in this program, is that we cannot really observe it. And all the impact evaluation methods and methodologies try to do is identify a way to mimic, to construct, to estimate this particular aspect. So here is an example of how the counterfactual helps us to do the program, right? Same graph as before. We see that our literacy index has increased over time after the intervention at a higher rate than before. The counterfactual is very likely not going to be where we were before the program was implemented. We would have probably increased our knowledge on financial literacy over time anyway, even without this fancy new program. So the impact really is that difference, right? Today is the difference between this yellow dot and the blue dot in the graph. It's not the difference between the yellow dot at the end of our time distribution and where we were at the time of the training. It's a little bit smaller in this example. There's also another example, very relevant for the financial crisis. You might have done something before a financial crisis that you thought were going to help people take better financial decisions, but ultimately you go back again and measure and see that their overall level of knowledge or their behavior has worsened over time. Do we throw away this policy or this program because it led to negative impacts? Again, the question is, where or how can we estimate this counterfactual? In this particular example in this slide, the counterfactual would have actually been worse. So reducing bad is also a positive impact. Now let's move to methods and look at randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials, or randomized evaluation, and I hope there is a translation for this in Russian, are the best way to construct this counterfactual, to understand how would the life of the people that we're trying to improve changed had this particular intervention that we're trying to study not happened. And it's important, impact evaluation, it's about testing one particular program, one particular intervention, one idea. So the randomized evaluation works a bit like this. It's really simple. We have a sample, this is the yellow dots, and then we randomly, through a lottery, through a randomization, or even by throwing a dice, we're randomly assigning them to receive the program or not receive the program. The fact that this assignment was random really makes it easy for us to assume that these individuals had the same chance of participating or not participating in the program, which means that the members in the group also had the same chance of having been in financial difficulties in the past or not, and also have the same chance of going into financial difficulties in the future. And so this is why the two programs become ultimately nicely comparable. There's one caveat: you need a large enough sample, and this is oftentimes a question and oftentimes a reasoning for which evaluations in general are considered a difficult thing to implement. There is a question of how many people you can actually involve in this evaluation. So the randomized controlled trial is the gold standard in terms of conducting impact evaluations. And the point is, you have a treatment group, a group that receives the intervention, and a control group, a group that does not receive the intervention. And these two groups do not differ systematically before the experiment. And after the experiment, any difference between the two groups will be nicely attributable to the program that you are hoping to evaluate. So I hope this is a clear, it gives you a clear sense of the key methodology. Randomized control trials are not often, not always feasible. There are sometimes political reasons. There are sometimes simply other reasons. Like, for example, it's very difficult to make a randomized evaluation of a TV program because you can't exclude people from the treatment. We have done that. Actually, the Russia Trust Fund has supported one of a very nice and neat way to do that. But they're not always feasible. So we choose and we look at also other ways to really estimate this counterfactual. Two common methods are the simple difference and a pre-post evaluation. These are two common methods, but I dare say these are two methods that are not correct in trying to do this kind of assessment of the counterfactual, or definitely suboptimal, because they have some obvious flaws that we're going to need to control. The simple difference is essentially comparing the impact of, it's comparing two groups at the end of the program. So if one group received the program and another group did not receive the program, we're just saying, okay, look, group A is doing better than group B, and so the program was really impactful. The problem is that oftentimes we are comparing people that chose to participate in a program with people that chose not to participate in a program, and this leads to an obvious selection bias. There's other reasons why this wouldn't work. The other point hopefully came across in the slide before. Doing just a measurement with one group and compare what happened today with where we were before the program had started creates an obvious bias, in the sense that a lot of other things, including economic development or other programs, maybe the central bank has started another program while the Treasury was doing the program that we're trying to evaluate. Anyway, many things can affect the ultimate outcome that are not related to the program that we're trying to test. Better methods to approximate impact evaluation are a difference in difference, which, and I'm going to lose you here in many situations, is really the difference between group A and group B before the intervention. And then we're taking another difference, which is the difference between group A and group B after the intervention, after group A received the intervention. And then I am subtracting the two differences together and finding the impact. Sounds really complicated. It's really not if I were to do it show it in a graph, but I chose not to. And it's a fairly solid way to estimate what would have happened had the program not existed. I will not go into the other methods because they get more complicated as we go, but there are other methodologies that can be used if a randomized control trial is not feasible for many reasons, including opportunity. The problem when we're using other impact evaluation methods, and when you're reading of studies or results that are based on other impact evaluation methods, is really try to second guess what are the assumptions that went behind thinking that the control group represents what would have happened had the program not existed. Because these assumptions are often very courageous, very difficult to prove and to test. Enough with enough with the theory, and now let's just look at an example in practice. This is an example of a tutoring program that we did in India, and it's this table really shows how these different methods can really bring you to draw different conclusions. We're looking at the effect of this tutoring program on test scores for students. So it's a very basic study. This is actually an example of an evaluation that costs nothing because the measurement was already being done. Every year at school they take this national test, and that's easy. So anyway, as you can see, the pre-post, so looking at the same group before and after the program, would have led us to think that this program had some incredibly large impacts. Problem is that these students have actually learned other things, not only financial education or whatever our, or whatever the tutor has led them to learn over time. So this is not really a good counterfactual. The simple difference, as an example, comparing just one group with another group without making any kind of random assignment, and at the end of the program would have actually led us to think that this program was bad for students. Maybe we had, we made them lose time and they didn't have enough, time to do their homework because they were participating in this tutoring program. My point is, method matters, and the best method you can find, the better chance you're going to have, you're going to be able to reach a conclusion on really the impact of a particular program and draw the right conclusions. And this is a general point that we'll make in this panel several times, is there is a cost to not doing an evaluation, which is the risk of making the wrong conclusions and the risk of spending resources on solutions that are not efficient or not optimal. So this is an important, I think, point to make. We don't need to make evaluations on everything, but we need to really try to test the mechanisms and work with mechanisms that are tested and proven to function if we want to make sure that we are spending money well. The point that Florian was also making is that evaluation is a nice thing to do at a pilot stage when you are starting to think about a policy before you scale it up nationwide, for example, and try to pick up, to implement a program nationally. The reason is also that evaluation allows us to test, a nicely designed evaluation might allow us to test different alternative methods to implement a program. Okay, enough with the boring stuff on method, and now I just want to quickly give you an overview on what we know on financial education. First of all, there's a very basic theory of change for financial education, and it starts with the understanding of a policy challenge. People might actually not be making informed and optimal financial decisions. They have low financial capability. These terms are often used together. And so the question is, what might be the reason? When we think about financial education, we've already made that choice. We think that the reason for this issue is that they have low financial literacy. And some of the research that was done so far shows that really it is the case, even in the most developed countries, that people have a low understanding of financial concepts. So if it's true that the main reason for the fact that people are not making informed financial decisions is low financial literacy, then if we improve literacy, decisions will improve. This is a very strong assumption to make. So there's one question that we have to think about is, are there other barriers that might lead to this low financial capability observation? And this is something I will, if I have time, briefly talk about later. And then, and then if we made the assumption that low financial literacy is the key to low financial capability, then we're also making a third assumption when we're thinking about financial education, and it's that training works. Education is the best strategy to increase this literacy level. Maybe experience could also be another way to increase the understanding that individuals have on financial concepts. And there's also another question, is education at all effective? Is it, it depends a lot on the design and on how you're framing this, how you're designing this education product. So the evidence shows there's been a lot of research done on financial education, luckily, and various types of programs have been tested. The nice thing is that we actually have a lot of evidence to choose from. The bad thing is that both the programs are so varied that often are put in the same bucket. There's financial education programs that lasted 2 hours and financial education programs that lasted 15 months in the same bucket. And then we're trying to say, okay, let's put it all together. Does it work? And this is difficult. The other issue is that we have not really measured so far financial education and financial knowledge in a very comparable way. And this is another aspect that limits what we can learn from other research. So evidence on impact for adults is mixed. There's some improvements, but it seems that most financial education programs have actually have had effects that only lasted short term, especially when we're looking at changes like improvements in savings. There's another question around convincing adults to participate in these trainings. And I saw that there's also an attempt of creating these trainings for adults here in Russia. And one thing I would invite you to think about critically is how do we make them interesting? And we found there's a study, again funded by the Russia Trust Fund, that is looking at giving some serious financial incentives to adults to participate in a free program and still obtain less than 40% attendance. And then I'm running a bit out of time, so I'll wrap up with the next couple slides. There's evidence on impact on youth, which is a bit more promising. There's a few reasons for it. Youth is easier to reach. They're already in school, at least the one that is in school. They're already in school, so they're already learning. They're more receptive. Youth is also might be just more be better predisposed to learn and absorb some of these concepts. And delivery is actually more efficient in some ways. So there's two programs that I'm quickly going to highlight. One of them is a financial education program in Brazil, and we find some nice, good positive effects from this program. It was implemented in high school. It was designed very, very well, I think, in the sense that it was a financial education program embedded in textbooks and in the teaching that the students were receiving across different subject matters, with a considerable amount of training given to teachers, and with a good timeline in the sense of the fact that it expanded over 3 semesters. So it was a pretty intensive intervention. The evaluation, which was done through a randomized controlled trial, found important increases in financial knowledge, some increases in savings, planning, and participation in household financial decisions. Another interesting thing, which was maybe for some unexpected, although the program really tried to target this spillover, is that the program had also an impact on some of these indicators for parents. So there's evidence that actually, if well done, financial education on youth could really spill over to parents. Another interesting program is this program that we did with IPA in Uganda on education compared to access to savings. This was implemented in church groups, slightly older audience. And after 1 year, we find that both financial education and just offering access to savings accounts had impacts on savings. So there's an interesting question here. We put two things in race: financial education program and just offering access to savings accounts. And we see that both interventions actually led to a similarly good increase in savings. We also tried to do both. So one group received both the financial education and the savings, and we didn't really find higher levels of savings in that particular group, which would suggest that maybe for some outcomes, education and access are not necessarily complements. They might be just reaching, there might be a limit of how much we can reach with those. The education did lead to an improvement in financial knowledge. Great. I'll close just by saying our work at IPA and with this Financial Capability Research Fund really looks at barriers and strategies that are also not the traditional ones. So there's not only knowledge as a barrier to low financial capability, and what we're trying to figure out is whether there are interventions that address social and behavioral barriers that can allow people to improve their capability, and strategies even within education that are maybe not only based on a classroom-style financial education program or type of program, and look at other ways to address knowledge and information gaps through messaging and other things. I can give you more information on the research that we're currently conducting at the break. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benny, for a very, I think, clear presentation of what is impact evaluation. And it's not necessarily easy to be clear on a subject that is rather technical. I said at the beginning that I would allow time for questions after each presentation. So if you have any pressing question for Benny now, please raise your hand.
Wait,
And
I need this, right?
yeah, and don't be shy. If not, I will ask you a quick question, Benny. Can you briefly tell us how, well, in your experience, how evaluation has been used to improve the delivery of financial education in particular, to improve or to develop initiatives?
Great. Good question. So yes, evaluation can really be done and used to test features of programs or perhaps to compare different curricula of of a particular training. There is one study which was actually done by Menno here, who really tried to do this, for example, in Ghana, and compare the was taking a program that had a financial education component, an access to savings component, and then a third component which was really about teaching these children some social values about their role, their rights, and teaching them also to improve, well, trying to improve their self-esteem and understand what would be the negative effects of, for example, engaging in, dropping out of school and going to work. So an evaluation in this case, what it did is compare this particular program with a program that did everything else in terms of financial education and access to savings, but did not have the social component, and tried to figure out what were, which design would be more adequate for the students. And the nice part of using evaluation to do this is that we really found no impact on, no differentials really, on savings and financial knowledge decisions, but there was an interesting difference between the two programs. In the case of the program that did not have the social component, students ended up working more. They didn't earn more, but they started working more because they were essentially incentivized to save, and so they were trying to find, we assume, it's still an hypothesis, but they were trying to find other ways to to improve their savings. And this is a potentially negative effect of financial education if what we're caring for is avoiding, job market participation from the youth.
Okay, thank you, Benny, for this clarification and for this new example. Before moving to Menno, I'd like to highlight that indeed financial evaluation of financial education program is really useful if you want to scale up program. For example, the examples that you were giving about Brazil. I mean, Brazil did this very large pilot of financial education programs in high school, and since the results were very successful, they decided to scale it up at the national level and also to introduce financial education to primary school. So the fact that they've done evaluation on the framework that they've been developing has allowed them to make sure that this was working and being able to scale it up at a national frame. And I think that's the intent also in Russia. So with that, I leave the floor to Menno.